Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, here's your hook. What if the person you trusted most poisoned your dreams, literally, in a single shattering moment? This story's got it all. A dazzling tech empire, a love on the brink, and a betrayal so dark it'll chill your soul. Stick with me to the end, because what Clara discovers next will flip everything you think you know upside down. Hit that subscribe button, grab a snack, and let's plunge into this wild ride. You won't believe where it takes us. In the pulsing heart of Silicon Valley, where innovation crackled like lightning through the air, Clara Hensley stood bathed in the golden glow of a dream she'd woven with love. At 30 years old, she was a vision of quiet grace, her chestnut hair tumbling in soft curls, her hazel eyes glinting with a warmth that could thaw the frostiest coder's heart. 7 months pregnant, she cradled her bump with tender reverence, her fingers tracing the curve as if whispering secrets to the life within. Tonight, their Palo Alto mansion, a sleek fortress of glass and steel, thrummed with the elite of the tech world. The air buzzed with anticipation, not just for a biotech breakthrough, but for the tiny heartbeat she and Daniel had nurtured through years of hope. Daniel Hensley, 38, was the genius behind Hensley Biotech, a titan whose gene-editing marvels had turned him into a Silicon Valley legend. Tall and magnetic, with piercing blue eyes and a jaw chiseled with ambition, he strode through the crowd like a king claiming his court. His voice, deep and commanding, wove spells of innovation, promises of curing diseases with a single injection that captivated investors and scientists alike. To Clara, he was her anchor, the man who'd lifted her from a cramped San Francisco studio where she'd once sketched fragile dreams on a battered tablet. She'd traded her artist's life for his, believing their bond was forged in steel. Tonight, as she watched him charm a guest near a glowing 3D printer, spitting out DNA-shaped trinkets, her heart swelled, yet a faint tremor of doubt rippled beneath it. The party was a symphony of extravagance. Crystal flutes clinked with champagne that sparkled like molten gold, while sleek drones whirred overhead, delivering trays of molecular gastronomy, tiny spheres of caviar bursting with flavor, truffles shaved over edible gold leaf. The mansion's lab-inspired decor dazzled, walls pulsed with holographic displays of spiraling DNA, and a faint hum of machinery purred from the basement, where Daniel's team brewed miracles in vats of shimmering liquid. Clara smoothed her emerald silk dress, its fabric hugging her bump like a lover's embrace, and smiled at the guests. "We're over the moon," she said, her British lilt, echoes of her London youth, drawing admiring glances. But exhaustion tugged at her edges, her body weary from pregnancy, her spirit frayed by Daniel's late nights in the lab, surrounded by glowing screens and sterile steel. Then, she saw her, Margot Pierce, a shadow slinking through the crowd with feline grace. At 26, Margot was a blaze of ambition cloaked in porcelain skin, her raven black hair gleaming like oil under the chandeliers. Her emerald eyes flashed with a hunger that prickled Clara's skin. Officially, Margot was a star researcher at Hensley Biotech. Her latest project, a drug delivery system using nanobots, poised to redefine medicine. Unofficially, she was a riddle wrapped in allure. Daniel had brought her into their orbit weeks ago, his tone casual, but his gaze alight with something Clara couldn't name. "She's brilliant, Clara," he'd said, waving off her quiet unease. "A game changer." Now, watching Margot glide toward Daniel with a smile sharp as a scalpel, Clara felt a cold dread coil in her gut. Margot reached Daniel's side, her laughter slicing through the hum like a siren's wail. She leaned in, too close, her breath brushing his ear as she whispered something that sparked a grin across his face. A rare, unguarded joy Clara hadn't seen in months. The room tilted, the chatter fading to a dull roar as Clara's eyes fixed on them. Margot's hand grazed his arm, lingering with a possessiveness that made Clara's breath hitch. A guest jostled her, snapping her back. "Oops, sorry, love," the woman chirped, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Clara forced a smile, her grip tightening on her glass of sparkling water. "It's just work," she told herself, but the lie tasted bitter, the doubt sinking deeper. As the night unfurled, Clara drifted through the party, her artist's eye drinking in every detail. The way the holograms cast eerie blue fractals on the walls, the sharp tang of chemicals wafting from an open lab door, the rustle of eucalyptus beyond the glass. She loved this world, its brilliance and promise. But tonight, it felt like a mirage. She glanced at Daniel again, now huddled with Margot and investors near a bubbling bioreactor tank, its green glow casting strange shadows. His laughter boomed, free and bright, while Margot's gaze flicked to Clara, swift, sly, predatory. A sudden ache bloomed in her chest, sharp and unbidden. She pressed a hand to her bump, imagining her baby's laugh, high and sweet, like Daniel's, and whispered, "You'll have his eyes, won't you?" The thought steadied her, a fragile lifeline. Daniel took the stage, a sleek platform framed by pulsing lights. "Tonight, we unveil the future," he declared, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. He gestured to Margot, who stepped forward, radiant and ruthless. "Margot Pierce's nanobots will save millions. Precision medicine, no compromises." Cheers erupted, but Clara's smile wavered. Margot soaked in the applause, her eyes sliding to Daniel with a claim that chilled Clara's blood. Needing air, Clara slipped onto the terrace, the night breeze kissing her cheeks with a salty tang. She leaned against the railing, her hands cradling her bump, and closed her eyes. The baby kicked, a defiant little dance, and she smiled through the ache. "We'll be a family," she murmured, picturing a crib by the sea, Daniel's voice singing lullabies. But when she looked back inside, Daniel and Margot stood alone by the bar, heads bent close, sharing a laugh that echoed with intimacy. The unease flared into a dark premonition, a shadow creeping over her perfect world. Something was coming, something wicked, and it was closer than she feared. The Hensley mansion glittered like a jewel in the Silicon Valley night, its glass walls reflecting the ambitions of a world obsessed with tomorrow. But what Clara saw next would plant a seed of dread so deep it'd grow into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Inside, the party roared on, a dazzling chaos of innovation and excess, while Clara Hensley lingered on the terrace, her emerald dress swaying in the breeze. 7 months pregnant, she pressed a hand to her bump, her hazel eyes tracing the stars above Palo Alto. The cool air soothed her, a fragile balm against the unease festering in her chest. She wanted to believe in Daniel's love, in their perfect life, but the image of him laughing with Margot Pierce, too close, too intimate, clawed at her peace. "We're stronger than this," she murmured to her baby, her voice trembling with hope. Yet the night was about to unravel her trust thread by thread. Stepping back into the fray, the mansion assaulted her senses. The hum of a bioreactor pulsed from the basement lab, its green glow seeping through the floor like a living thing. Holographic screens flickered with DNA strands twisting in hypnotic loops, and the sharp tang of chemicals mingled with the sweet fizz of champagne. Clara wove through the crowd, her smile a brittle mask as she searched for Daniel. She needed his warmth, his reassurance, to drown the doubts swelling inside her. But near the bar, a shadow moved. Margot Pierce, her raven hair glinting like polished obsidian under the chandeliers. Her emerald eyes swept the room, cold and calculating, before locking onto Clara for a fleeting, piercing moment. A smirk tugged at Margot's lips, sly and deliberate, as her slender fingers danced over a tray of drinks. Clara's breath hitched, her artist's eye catching every sinister detail. Margot plucked a glass of orange juice, Clara's drink, a bright splash of innocence amid the alcohol, and turned it subtly in her hand. From her sleek clutch, she drew a vial, tiny and glinting with menace, its contents shimmering faintly before vanishing into the juice with a practiced flick. The motion was swift, a predator's strike, and Margot's smirk widened as she handed the glass to a server. "For Mrs. Hensley," she purred, her voice low but cutting through the chatter. The server, a lanky young man with a nervous grin, nodded and threaded toward Clara, oblivious to the venom he carried. "Here you go, ma'am," he said, offering the glass with a slight bow. Clara took it, her fingers trembling, the citrus scent sharp and deceptively sweet. Margot's gaze lingered on her, a silent dare, and Clara's heart thudded, a warning she couldn't ignore. She raised the glass, hesitating, the liquid swirling like liquid gold under the lights. The party faded to a distant hum as dread coiled tighter, her instincts screaming. Did I see that right? She wondered, replaying Margot's deft hands, the vial's lethal gleam. Daniel's voice cut through her haze, warm and beckoning. Clara, over here! He waved from across the room, standing with Margot and a knot of investors, his grin wide and boyish. Relief surged. She was imagining things, wasn't she? Just tired, hormonal, seeing shadows where there were none. She smiled back, took a small sip, and crossed to him. The juice's tang masking a faint, bitter edge she brushed off as nerves. Enjoying yourself, love? Daniel asked, slinging an arm around her. His touch was a lifeline, stirring memories of their early days, nights sketching by candlelight, his laughter filling her tiny studio. She leaned into him, craving that past simplicity. It's a huge night, he said, his blue eyes alight with pride. Margot's nanobots. They'll target diseases like snipers. Brilliant, right? Margot tilted her head, her smile dazzling yet edged with steel. Daniel's too kind, she said, her voice smooth as silk. But it's effective. Her gaze flicked to Clara's glass, then back to her face, and a chill slithered down Clara's spine, sharp and unyielding. The talk turned to biotech jargon, nanoparticles, FDA trials, billion-dollar futures. But Clara's mind drifted. A dull throb bloomed in her temples, seeping into her skull like ink through water. She blinked, the room blurring at the edges, her grip tightening on the glass. You all right? Daniel asked, his brow creasing. She nodded, forcing a laugh. Just the baby kicking. It's been a long day. He squeezed her shoulder, already turning back to the group, his attention slipping away. Margot watched her, though, her eyes glinting with a quiet, feral intensity, as if savoring a secret unfolding. Time stretched, and the throb sharpened into a blade. It sank into her abdomen, twisting with cruel precision around her baby. Clara excused herself, her steps faltering as she slipped into a hallway lined with sleek lab equipment. Centrifuges humming, test tubes glowing faintly blue. She leaned against the wall, her breath shallow, her hands clutching her bump. This wasn't normal, not the gentle ache of pregnancy, but a jagged alien torment. Panic surged, hot and wild, as she stumbled to a bathroom, splashing water on her face. Her reflection stared back, pale, haunted, her eyes wide with fear. What's happening? She whispered, her voice cracking. The baby kicked, faint and frail, and tears welled up, spilling over as she clutched the sink. Back at the party, Margot glided through the crowd, her laughter a silver dagger cutting the air. She sidled up to Daniel, her hand brushing his as she leaned in. Clara caught the end of it, swaying as she returned. Won't be an issue much longer, Margot murmured, her tone dripping with certainty. Daniel frowned, pulling back. What's that supposed to mean? Margot's smile tightened, her eyes darting to Clara with a flicker of triumph. The room spun, and Clara's glass slipped, shattering on the hardwood floor with a crystalline crash. Gasps rippled through the guests, but she barely heard them. The pain was a beast now, roaring through her core. Daniel! She gasped, reaching for him, her nails digging into his arm. He rushed to her, his face draining of color. Clara, what's wrong? His voice shook, his polish cracking. Something's bad. The baby. Her words choked into a sob as agony buckled her knees. He caught her, shouting, Someone get help! The crowd parted, murmurs swelling, but Margot stood still, her lips twitching with a shadow of satisfaction. A medic, Dr. Patel from Hensley's team, raced over, his voice sharp. She's in distress! Call 911. Daniel knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he stroked her hair. Stay with me, Clara, please, he begged. but his voice faded, swallowed by the pounding in her ears. As the world blurred into shadows, Clara's last glimpse was Margot's smirk, a venomous seed blooming into a nightmare she'd never foreseen. The ambulance tore through Silicon Valley's neon-lit streets, its siren a banshee's wail heralding a tragedy Clara couldn't yet grasp. But what she'd feel next would rip her soul in two. Strapped to a stretcher, her emerald dress soaked with sweat, Clara Hensley fought a storm of pain that raged through her like a wildfire. Her abdomen twisted with vicious, unnatural spasms, each one a dagger sinking deeper into her 7-month bump. Her hands clawed the stretcher's edges, knuckles white as bone, her breath ragged gasps between sobs. "My baby," she croaked, her voice a fragile thread lost in the chaos. Paramedics loomed over her, their faces taut with urgency, shouting over the roar of the engine. "Pulse 140, BP dropping fast," as they jammed an oxygen mask over her mouth. Daniel clung to her side, his blue eyes wild with panic, his trembling hands clutching hers. "You're okay, Clara! I've got you!" he choked out. But his words dissolved into the terror etching his face, a mask of a man unraveling. The hospital doors slammed open, swallowing Clara into a whirlwind of antiseptic and steel. Stanford's ER was a battlefield. Gurneys clattered, monitors screeched, and the air stung with the sharp bite of disinfectant mingled with the coppery tang of fear. Nurses in blue scrubs swarmed, their voices a frantic chorus as they wheeled her into a bay framed by flickering fluorescent lights. Pain surged, a tsunami drowning her, and her vision splintered. Daniel's desperate shouts, the icy prick of an IV piercing her vein, a medic barking, "She's seizing! Push the mag sulfate!" She pictured her baby's face, tiny, perfect, with Daniel's blue eyes and her soft smile, giggling in a crib by the sea. "Hold on for me," she whispered, her voice lost as a scream ripped free, primal and shattering, before blackness swallowed her whole. She awoke to a silence that crushed her chest, the beep of a heart monitor, a cruel tick-tock in the sterile void. Her body felt wrong, heavy yet empty, a shell robbed of its treasure. The fluorescent glare stung her eyes as they drifted to her stomach, now flatter, a traitor to the life she'd guarded. Her breath hitched, a sob clawing up her throat as reality crashed down like a collapsing tower. Her trembling hands fumbled over the hospital gown, searching for the bump that had been her world, now gone. "No," she rasped, the word a jagged shard cutting through her. "No, no, please!" Tears scalded her cheeks, her arms wrapping around herself, rocking as grief erupted, a wail that echoed off the cold walls like a mother's shattered hymn. A nurse slipped in, her gray eyes soft with sorrow. "Mrs. Hensley," she said gently, but her pause was a guillotine hovering. Clara's gaze snapped to her, wild and pleading. "My baby! Where's my baby?" The nurse's lips trembled, her silence a death knell. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick. "You went into labor from severe distress. The baby, we couldn't save her." The words detonated, blasting Clara's heart into fragments. "Her?" she echoed, a fresh wave of agony crashing over her. A daughter, a little girl she'd never hold. She saw her then, in a flash of cruel imagination. Tiny hands reaching, a laugh like bells, curls framing a face she'd never kiss. Her cries turned guttural, a mother's soul bleeding out as she clutched the empty space where her daughter should have been. Daniel burst in, his face a ruin of ash and despair, his suit crumpled from pacing the linoleum halls. "Clara!" he breathed, lunging to her bedside. He reached for her, but she recoiled, her eyes blazing with a fury forged in loss. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice a raw, trembling blade. "What took her from me?" He faltered, his mouth gaping like a fish drowning in air. "The doctors said, 'Complications,'" he stammered, his gaze sliding away. But Clara saw the guilt flickering in his eyes, and it lit a match to her rage. "Liar!" she hissed, her hands balling into fists. "It wasn't complications. It was poison." Dr. Elena Martinez strode in, her white coat crisp, her dark eyes grim as she clutched a tablet. "She's right," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Your blood work shows a synthetic neurotoxin. Experimental. Lethal to cellular stability. It triggered the collapse and the loss. This was no accident." Clara's chest heaved, the pieces slamming together. Margot's smirk, the vial, that bitter tang. "Margot!" she snarled, her eyes locking on Daniel's. "I told you I saw her poison my drink. She killed our daughter." His jaw dropped, horror dawning as he shook his head. "Clara, no! Margot wouldn't." "She did!" she roared, her voice a thunderclap. "And you let her slither into our lives, ignored me, and now our baby's gone." The air crackled with her accusation, Daniel staggering back, as if struck. "I didn't know," he whispered, raking hands through his hair, panic seizing him. "I swear!" "You should have known," she spat, tears streaming as her voice turned to ice. "You fawned over her, left me alone, and she murdered our little girl. Where were you, Daniel?" He sank against the wall, his face buried in his hands, but Clara's fury burned brighter, unquenched by his collapse. She demanded Margot's presence, her voice a whip despite her fragile state. Daniel trailed her, pale and broken, as Margot sauntered in, her raven hair sleek, her emerald eyes glinting with icy calm. Her blazer was pristine, her poise a taunt. "Clara, what a tragedy," she said, her tone dripping with crocodile tears. "I'm devastated." "Shut up!" Clara snapped, sitting up, pain be damned, her glare a lance pinning Margot. "You poisoned me! You killed my daughter!" Margot's smile twitched, then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound that chilled the room. "You're delusional," she sneered, stepping closer, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Grief's twisted your mind." Clara leaned forward, her voice a low, lethal growl. "I saw you with that vial. The doctors found your poison. You're a murderer." Silence snapped tight, electric and suffocating. Margot's mask cracked, her sneer baring teeth. "Prove it," she hissed, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Daniel needs me, my nanobots, my brilliance. You were a weak little dreamer, slowing him down. I did him a favor." The words sliced Clara like razors, but she held firm, her voice rising. "You took my daughter, my everything. You'll pay." Daniel lunged forward, his face twisted with betrayal. "Is this true, Margot?" he roared, his voice raw. She pivoted, her sneer softening into a sultry pout. "Don't be foolish, Daniel. Think of the billions, your legacy. She was a liability." His fists clenched, trembling. "Get out!" he bellowed, his control shattering. Margot smirked, unfazed, and strutted to the door. "You'll crawl back," she tossed back, her exit a venomous promise. Clara collapsed against the pillows, sobs racking her as Daniel reached for her. She turned away, her heart a wasteland of grief and rage. The poison had stolen her daughter, the betrayal had gutted her trust, and the fight for justice was just beginning. The hospital room was a cage of grief, its white walls pressing in on Clara Hensley as she lay in the wreckage of her loss. But what she'd uncover next would turn her pain into a weapon. Her daughter was gone, stolen by Margot Pierce's poison, and Daniel's cowardice had carved a chasm between them. Yet beneath the suffocating sorrow, a ember glowed, flaring into a wildfire of resolve. Clara's hazel eyes, once tender with love, now blazed with a fierce, unyielding purpose. She wouldn't let Margot slither away, her daughter's death buried under Silicon Valley's gleaming facade. This was no longer just survival. It was vengeance, and Clara was ready to burn it all down. Daniel lingered, his face a crumpled map of guilt, his pleas. "Clara, I didn't mean for this," falling like ash on her ears. She turned away, her voice a shard of ice. "Get out, Daniel, I can't look at you." He hesitated, his hands twitching as if to reach for her, then shuffled out, the doors click a hollow echo of their shattered bond. Alone, Clara clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms as she forced the tears back. Weakness was a luxury she'd lost with her baby girl. Now she needed strength, sharp and relentless. Lily Carter burst in, her auburn curls a tangle, her brown eyes glistening with fury and tears. "Clara, oh God!" she whispered, enveloping her in a fierce hug that trembled with shared pain. Clara gripped her, Lily's warmth a lifeline pulling her from the abyss. "She took my daughter Lily," she choked out, her voice raw. "Margot poisoned me, and Daniel let her." Lily pulled back, her jaw tight. "That witch won't walk free. Tell me what you need." Clara's gaze hardened. "Proof. Justice. Her head on a platter." Lily sprang into action, dialing Dr. Jack Nguyen, a forensic toxicologist with a razor-sharp mind. Jack arrived, his lean frame dwarfed by a laptop and a stack of files, his dark eyes glinting with determination. "The neurotoxin's a match," he said, tapping the screen. "It's from Hensley Biotech's secure lab, logged under Margot's access 3 days before the party. She faked the project code." Clara's pulse raced, a grim triumph stirring. Lily added, her voice electric. "She's been stalking Daniel for months. Encrypted emails, late-night lab sessions. And get this, she blackmailed a coworker in grad school. She's a viper." Clara's mind flashed to Margot. Not just the smirking predator at the party, but a younger version, hunched in a dim dorm room years ago. She'd clawed her way up from a trailer park, her brilliance overshadowed by resentment, her emerald eyes burning as she watched richer classmates glide by. That hunger had twisted into something monstrous, and Clara had paid the price. "She hated me," Clara murmured, the insight fueling her fire. "I was everything she couldn't have." The trio plotted, Jack tracing the toxin's digital trail, Lily digging deeper into Margot's past, Clara insisting on leading despite her fragile state. "It's for my girl," she said, her voice steady as steel. Jack nodded, admiration in his gaze. "We'll nail her. Rest first. You're no good to us broken." She relented, her body aching, her heart a battlefield of rage and loss. Days blurred into a fevered mission. Clara pushed herself, leaning on a walker as she paced the hospital room, each step a rebellion against despair. Jack returned with gold. The toxin batch was synthesized in Lab 7, a sterile cave of glowing vials and whirring centrifuges. Margot's fingerprints are on the log. Lily grinned, holding up a USB drive. "And I've got her emails, scheming to push you out, Daniel's puppet." Clara's resolve crystallized. She called a press conference from her bed, her frail form propped up, her voice amplified by a mic Lily rigged. Cameras flashed as reporters swarmed, their lenses glinting like vultures' eyes. "I'm Clara Hensley," she declared, her tone unwavering. "Margot Pierce poisoned me, killed my daughter, at a Hensley Biotech event. I have lab logs, blood tests. She's a murderer. Arrest her." The story exploded online. Fierce justice for Clara, igniting social media. Hensley Biotech reeled, investors fleeing as the scandal scorched its name. That night, Clara's phone buzzed, a blocked number. She answered, her heart pounding. Margot's voice slithered through, low and venomous. "You think you've won, little artist? I'll bury you and Daniel both. Watch your back." The line went dead, but Clara's hands shook with fury, not fear. "Try me," she hissed to the silence, her resolve titanium. Daniel stormed in hours later, his face a tempest of panic. "Clara, you're destroying everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "The company's collapsing. My legacy." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Your legacy let a killer roam free. She murdered our daughter, and you protected her. Where's your spine?" He flinched, his shoulders sagging. "I didn't know. But Margot's tied to billions. If I cut her now—" "Cut her!" she snapped, her voice a whip. "Choose. Me and our girl, or her and your greed." He stared, torn, then muttered, "I need time," and fled, his cowardice a stench in the air. Lily burst in the next dawn, triumphant. "We've got it," she said, brandishing a sealed bag, a vial from Margot's lab trash, its label smudged but damning. traces of the toxin inside. Her prints are on it, Jack confirmed, his voice buzzing. Clara's chest tightened, victory bitter against her grief. Call the cops, she said, tears brimming, but her tone iron. Detectives raided Margot's condo, a sleek lair of glass and chrome. Live on TV. Clara watched, clutching the sheets, as Margot was cuffed, her raven hair wild, her emerald eyes flashing defiance. This is a lie, she shrieked, her polish shattering under the spotlight. Daniel returned that evening, haggard and hollow. She's done. I fired her, killed the deal. I'm ruined, Clara. He reached for her, but she pulled back, her eyes cold as frost. You ruined us first, she whispered, her words a final cut. You chose wrong. He slumped, broken, but Clara felt only the fierce pulse of a mother's justice. Margot was down, the evidence airtight, but the war wasn't over. She'd see it through, for her daughter's memory, no matter the cost. Clara Hensley stepped into the Palo Alto dawn, the hospital's sterile grip fading behind her. But what she'd face next would seal her triumph with one last, defiant stand. Leaning on Lily Carter's arm, her frail frame trembled beneath a simple sweater, her chestnut hair loose in the breeze. Her daughter's loss throbbed with every breath, a wound that would never fully heal, yet her hazel eyes gleamed with a quiet, unbreakable resolve. She'd toppled Margot Pierce's venomous reign, but the cost had hollowed her. Now, free of Silicon Valley's glittering chains, she sought a new dawn, not just for herself, but for the memory of her little girl. Margot's fall was a brutal spectacle. The vial, its damning traces of neurotoxin and her fingerprints, nailed her coffin shut. Charged with poisoning and manslaughter, she stood in court, her raven hair dull, her emerald eyes flickering with desperation. She spat lies, an accident, a research error. But the jury's verdict was swift, 7 years behind bars. The media feasted, Silicon Valley's prodigy reduced to a shackled shell, her sneers silenced by steel bars. Clara visited her once, standing before the prison glass, her voice steady as granite. You took my daughter, she said, her gaze piercing Margot's defiant stare. But you'll never take my strength. Margot smirked, her voice a rasp through the speaker. Enjoy your empty victory, Clara. But as Clara turned away, Margot's bravado cracked, her fists pounding the glass, a futile echo of her ruin. Daniel Hensley's empire crumbled in the fallout. Hensley Biotech bled investors, its stock crashing like a house of cards, the billion-dollar nanobot deal a ghost in the wreckage. Alone in his office, surrounded by dead screens and silent bioreactors, Daniel stared at a photo, Clara laughing, her bump glowing in sunlight. How did I lose her? He wondered, his hands trembling as guilt gnawed his core. He'd built a legacy on ambition, blind to the cost, and now it was dust. He sought Clara one last time, standing in her hospital doorway with wilting lilies, his voice a broken plea. I'm nothing without you, he said, eyes red with regret. I was wrong. Let me fix it. She looked at him, the man she'd once adored, and felt only a cold void. You fixed nothing when it mattered, she said, her tone final. Goodbye, Daniel. He left, the flowers drooping in his wake, a man undone by his own weakness. Clara severed their bond with a divorce filing, rejecting his wealth for the freedom to heal. She fled to a Santa Cruz cottage, its wooden walls kissed by sea salt, the ocean's roar a lullaby for her scars. Barefoot on the beach, she walked with the waves, her hands sketching invisible lines in the air. Art reborn from pain. Grief shadowed her, a constant companion, but she wove it into purpose. She launched the Safe Haven Foundation, a lifeline for victims of poisoning, women blindsided by betrayal, just as she'd been. Speaking at a small fundraiser, her voice rang clear. My daughter's gone, but her light drives me. No one should lose what I did. Together, we fight back. Donations soared, her story a beacon, her pain a bridge to others' healing. Months later, on her porch as the sunset bled gold and crimson, Clara stood with Lily, a mug of tea warming her hands. The cottage glowed with fresh paint, a sanctuary carved from loss. You turned ashes into hope, Lily said, her smile soft. Clara nodded, her throat tight. For her, she whispered, her hand resting where her bump once was. She saw her daughter then, blue eyes sparkling, curls dancing in the wind, and smiled through the tears. You gave me strength, little one, she said, her voice a vow to the sky. I'll carry you forever. The ocean roared its approval, a wild hymn to her resilience, and Clara felt peace. Fragile, hard-won, but hers. And that's Clara's story, folks. What a ride. Heartbreak, fury, and a comeback that hits you right here. Thanks for joining me every step of the way. Your support keeps these tales alive. What moved you most? Clara's fight? Margot's fall? Drop a comment. I read everyone. If this story lit a spark, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more epic journeys. Until next time, stay fierce, and I'll see you soon.